she told me on the phone what she had figured out. She said that she figured out that my bandmates and I were all Satanists and that we get together every weekend to perform rituals. And that was kind of the best case scenario. And then she sort of moved on to express her belief that, in addition to that I was some kind of demon and that I was possessing her and manipulating her and haunting her house and possessing her kids all at the same time. And that was pretty much the beginning of the very worst week of my entire life.
This is the Q Dropped podcast. Stories of relationships torn apart by QAnon. You've heard a lot of stories about parents who've been lost down the rabbit hole here on the Q Dropped podcast. We had a story about a son who has all but completely alienated his family as a result of his Q beliefs. But what we haven't covered much yet are stories of partnerships that have been negatively affected by this phenomenon. Often people ask us why or point that out, and our guest today is one of those people. Kurt wrote to us not so long ago and pointed out that we had covered a lot of stories about parents, but none about losing the love of your life. He told us he had lost his soulmate to Q, and we hadn't covered any stories like his. And it's almost true. We haven't had a regular episode on this podcast about a partnership in ruins over QAnon, but we have posted a patron-only episode along these lines to our Patreon. There is good reason for why we haven't covered many stories like that, and I told Kurt that it was simply that we had asked plenty of people whose marriage or romantic partnership had been affected by QAnon, but they had, for the most part, declined our requests. And I totally understand. I think enduring a divorce with children involved or losing your best friend to this sort of thing is a lot more challenging and painful to talk about than it is to talk about not being able to recognize your parents anymore. We're all intellectually prepared for the fact that one day we're going to lose our parents, whether it's to dementia, old age, or another illness. We are supposed to outlive them, and we're supposed to learn to go on once they're gone. But when it comes to our partners, we're supposed to grow old with them. I can see why losing a partner would be infinitely harder to talk about. In fact, just about every single person we had asked to talk about their lost Q love has said that they simply can't find the energy to talk about it. It's too exhausting. It's tearing open the wound again. So yes, we have not covered lost significant others on this podcast, with the exception of the one patron-only episode. But it is not for a lack of trying. When I explained this to Kurt and asked if he would be interested in telling his story, he graciously accepted. So before we even start, I want to thank Kurt for opening up to us about this painful experience, because this is a perspective we need to explore. I also want to remind you that you can get an ad-free version of this episode on our Patreon, as well as the patron-only episode, and you can also hear some extras from my interview with Kurt at the link in the show notes. John and I had no idea what we were about to hear when we sat down to chat with Kurt. This story is by far the most gutting and emotional story I've heard so far for so many reasons. But one of the biggest is how gentle, unassuming, and compassionate Kurt seems to be. We got to talk to him on a video call, and right away I could see he was about my age, Generation X. He was quiet and seemed very collected, unpretentious, humble, and you'll hear when you listen to him, he's got a way with words. Just a wonderful ability to put words together and paint a picture. So when he got to the meat of the story, which is nothing short of completely shocking, I think both John and I had our jaws on the floor and our hearts were just breaking for this man. This was not an easy story to listen to. I imagine it was not an easy story to share with us, but it is a story we have to hear because it gets right to the heart of why QAnon and Q-adjacent beliefs are so deeply harmful to our most cherished relationships. So let's jump into Kurt's tale of heartbreak, betrayal, and fear. Kurt is an artist and a craftsman.
That's how I make a living. I'm an artist, a musician, and I am a lover of natural beauty. And I live in the mountains in the Rockies. I'm a woodworker. I do several different types of woodworking. I make custom picture frames for one thing. I've done some furniture, and that kind of thing.
Kurt met his ex-partner over 20 years ago.
We first met, I want to say, back in the summer of 2002. We were coworkers, and she was on a break. She was attending college in the East, and she was home for a summer break, and we had a summer romance. And then the summer ended, and we kind of went our separate ways. She went back to school. I moved from the town that I was living in, but we maintained a kind of a friendship over those years. We kept in touch through social media. And then we both ended up back in the town that we originally met in. And by that point, she had gotten married and she had a couple of kids.
It would seem the attraction between Kurt and his ex had never fizzled out.
She approached me and she said that she knew that her marriage was ending and that they were separating, and that she still had feelings for me that she wanted to explore. And that turned into a 2-year relationship.
From the way Kurt describes it to me, it sounds like they had an incredibly equal and mutually respectful relationship from the get-go.
She was very supportive of me, and I was very supportive of her because she was going through the emotions and the stresses dealing with a divorce. She estimated that it would take a couple of months to be finalized, and it's longer than a year. But during that time, that initial time when, she knew that her marriage was over and we were starting up a relationship again, we became very close very fast. It was, like I said, it was supportive, but it was also very passionate and very deeply loving. We had that experience before. We'd had that summer romance a decade before or longer. And so we kind of had those passions to reignite. And very quickly it became a deeply loving and also very emotionally supportive relationship.
Despite their happiness, things had to be kept under wraps for the first few months.
They were still married, technically, I guess. And she didn't want our relationship to be public at first because of, she had 2 small kids involved, so we were kind of a secret at first just because she didn't want our relationship complicating her divorce. I could hang out with her younger kid because he wasn't talking yet, but I couldn't hang out with her older kid. So it kind of limited the amount of time we could spend together.
But eventually, things got much easier.
We pretty much made it through those rough times, with each other as support. Her divorce finally went through and things settled in that area. And we reached a point where it was kind of smooth sailing, like we could be more open with our relationship. We could go out and do things. I was starting to develop a relationship with her older kid. And so we were kind of cruising, and it was really nice for a while.
Kurt's girlfriend was a spiritual woman.
She was raised Catholic, but in her adult life, it wasn't a big part of her life. I think through family, she sort of maintained involvement in the Catholic Church, but she wasn't much of a practicing Catholic as I knew her. She was spiritual, and her spirituality was kind of a very New Age oriented spirituality. A lot of her spiritual beliefs had to do with terms like five dimensionality and star beings and the incarnation of souls. She felt very strongly about the idea that she was a soul who incarnated on this plane of reality in order to affect positive change and assist in healing.
Kurt also considered himself spiritual, but not quite in the same way as his girlfriend.
I am. I'm a bit more of a pragmatist. I consider myself very spiritual also, but because I work with my hands and I work with measurements, I'm somewhat pragmatic. That doesn't exclude me from being a spiritual person, but I was not ever quite on that level with her. I mean, she was a little bit more deeply spiritual, but it wasn't. We were compatible along those lines.
They also seemed to be compatible when it came to political beliefs.
I had always known her to be very liberal in terms of her political beliefs, and we were both fans of Bernie Sanders. She attended a very liberal college.
When I asked Kurt what her best quality was, he took no time to tell me how smart she was.
I found her to be a very intelligent person. She was a great conversationalist and very intelligent, very personable, and beautiful. And I felt that she was a very good and loving parent to her two kids.
So it seemed to come out of nowhere when she suddenly began to say things that were totally unlike her.
She started expressing distrust for the Democratic Party in general. And then she started expressing distrust for Hollywood and how it operates. And those were the first initial stirrings in that area. It didn't really make much of an impact on me. I just thought, these were some strange things to be expressing.
It was when his girlfriend met and became friends with a spiritual leader in the small town that they lived in that she really started to head down a strange rabbit hole.
There was a person who was a mutual acquaintance of ours who lives in my town who is an energy worker. He is a New Age spiritual counselor and energy worker. And she encountered him, and he immediately resonated very much with her because he was involved with a lot of things that she aspired to. He was kind of a healer and a counselor, and that's how she saw herself. And she was sharing a lot of information with him and receiving a lot of information from him. I think mostly along the lines of her spiritual beliefs, and she was getting sessions with him. And I've had a few sessions with him, and I kind of found him to be somewhat adept. This is all an esoteric realm, so it's not exactly concrete, but I thought he was fairly skilled at what he was doing. And at one point, he offered a seminar, and the purpose of the seminar was to awaken psychic abilities, like to facilitate having spiritual visions. And I think it was either a 2 or a 3-day seminar that she attended. She came home from the seminar very excited, and she wanted to share something with me, kind of like the way a person might come home from a ceramics class and want to show off what they made. She came to visit me after having attended the seminar, and she wanted to share with me the vision that she had during the seminar. And she started describing it, and she started describing how she saw Hillary Clinton torturing a child. And I said, I don't want to hear about that. I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm not calling you a liar. It's just that I really don't want that subject and that energy in my world. I sometimes have a tough time watching horror films, even knowing that they're fake and it's stage blood, and I didn't really want to hear about her visions of Hillary Clinton torturing kids. So I said, I'm not going to listen to this anymore. And she got angry and she left.
It became clear to Kurt that this man was having a significant influence on his girlfriend.
As it turns out, in that seminar that I mentioned, the leader of the seminar, our mutual acquaintance, he didn't bring QAnon into the seminar per se, but during breaks in this seminar, he was talking to his students, I guess, about QAnon because he was very excited about it, and it was just emerging. And I seem to recall something about him claiming to be friends with this government insider who was now spilling the beans on the deep state and all that. And, so she fully embraced this modality, this worldview, and started spelling it out for me what it was. And she started sending me links.
It would also become apparent that she wanted to draw Kurt down the rabbit hole with her.
So because we were in a serious, committed, full-time relationship, and because this was brand new and exciting for her, and that she was eating it up and she was subscribing to it 500%, she wanted to get me into it too. At first, in that initial confrontation where I told her I didn't want to hear about kids being tortured, she kind of backed off and she said, well, okay, we can still have a relationship whether or not I choose to believe in this. But, little by little, she was trying to draw me in.
Kurt had every right to get irritated at this point, but he listened to her with an open mind and followed the links and watched the videos that she sent him. Though he found it all very strange, he was willing to do some research and see where it landed him. Unfortunately, these theories never passed the simplest fact checks.
There was a big story about sealed indictments that was going around within the Q community. And for those who don't know, this was a story where supposedly there were something like 60,000 sealed indictments in federal court, and they were all aimed at taking down the deep state satanic pedophiles. And supposedly with the stroke of a pen, Donald Trump could unseal all these indictments and have the folks rounded up and sent to Guantanamo Bay and indefinitely detained or executed. And that was a very firm pillar of the QAnon belief system back then. Okay, well, I read about these supposed sealed indictments. And what I found was that the data that had resulted in this claim was very clearly manipulated. It had to do with search parameters. Like there's a federal court database that the public can access, and you can learn how many sealed documents there are in federal court, and then you can filter out certain types. You can You can set your search parameters for various ranges. There are all kinds of ways of setting the search parameters. And for one thing, if a document is sealed, we don't know what that document is. We don't know if it's a sealed indictment or if it's, let's say, a 16-year-old who got a parking ticket. It just says sealed document. So by manipulating the search, they could create this belief that there were 60,000 sealed indictments ready to be unleashed on the deep state. And it was very easy to see that that was total bullshit.
Kurt would eventually challenge the things his girlfriend was saying.
There were other things that she was trying to share with me, like, QAnon grew out of Pizzagate, essentially. So a lot of this had to do with going back and looking at Pizzagate and seeing how that turned into QAnon. And I just found too many inconsistencies. I found a photograph that was supposedly of Huma Abedin wearing a child's flayed face as a mask. And there was a debunk of that, and that was a photograph taken from the website of an Indian restaurant in Washington, D.C., with the owner wearing a gold mask, and the photograph was heavily manipulated and distorted, but it was clearly the same photograph. So I just found, in doing my own research, I found too many inconsistencies for me to decide that this was an area that I wanted to pursue or something that I would believe. She was sending me links, and after a while she said, "So what do you think about all this?" And I said, "Well, based on what I've seen, it's all bullshit. And it's not for me." And I think she was pretty much taken aback by that, considering how deeply invested she was in this. This was gospel to her. This was her new worldview, and there was nothing that I could do or say that was going to change her mind about it.
Kurt struggled with the complete 180 his girlfriend had done with her political viewpoints.
One thing that we shared before this happened was a tremendous disdain for Donald Trump. I consider him to be a horrible politician and even worse as a human. And she was pretty much right on the same page. But based on her beliefs, she was trying to convince me of the idea that he's really playing 5-dimensional chess or 3-dimensional chess or whatever you call it. And that, he has his public persona, but that in real life, he's this mastermind who is fully embraced by the angels, and he's here to do God's work, and he's this ultimate puppet master. And I wasn't buying it. I had no reason to think that he was anything other than just a horrendous piece of shit. She said something about his name, that his name was Trump because the new age was going to be trumpeted in, that he was the trumpet that was going to herald this new and glorious age, and that the angels would sing and the sun would shine, and thanks to this guy, we would all be living our best lives all of a sudden.
Soon, Kurt would come to the conclusion that he would never follow her down the rabbit hole.
One thing that dynamic did for me is, I believe it caused me to read more into it and to learn more of the ins and outs and the details about QAnon, more so than most people who aren't adherents. I think that most people who hear about QAnon dismiss it pretty quickly if they don't go down the rabbit hole themselves. And they don't really want to hear about it. And they just cut off, and, they don't give it much thought. But because she was the love of my life, I felt that that situation gave me more objectivity than most people bring into that discussion, because I wanted our relationship to be harmonious, and I wanted us to be on as many common pages together as possible. So I was really trying to keep my mind as open as possible when I was hearing about this. But my bullshit alarm just kept going off and I couldn't do it. And so then it became the idea that we could keep our relationship together and we just wouldn't talk about this kind of thing. And that was mostly her going, okay, well, I don't think he's going to embrace this, but at least we can maintain our relationship and we can, just work past it and not let it get in the way. So I wasn't necessarily challenging her, but I was making it clear to her that this is not going to become my worldview.
Like most of us, Kurt loved a good conspiracy theory once upon a time. Not because he found them accurate and with no intention of changing his worldview, but rather for fun. Many of us have sat down with friends or family and discussed darker possibilities just to spice up the conversation. I certainly did. But the difference between exploring theories over a cold brew with a buddy and what QAnon adherents are doing is that one is a passing conversation that doesn't follow you into your real life, while QAnoners are completely changing who they are fundamentally for some wild tale of evil and treachery.
Now, one thing I should say is that I have flirted with other conspiracy theories in the past. Looking back at the JFK assassination, 9/11, and contrails and ancient aliens, I was into those kind of things. But in my mind, there was always a little disclaimer of for entertainment purposes only. Like I wasn't going to make any serious decisions based on these views. It was kind of a fun conversation to have amongst peers. Hey, Building 7, what could have possibly brought down Building 7? And the contrails are so evident. And also, when it comes to JFK, you got to admit that Oliver Stone made a good movie. It just wasn't true, or it just didn't have much of a factual basis. But I remember I love movies and I got really into that movie. So I don't know. I kind of thought, yeah, it's most likely there was a conspiracy that killed JFK, but I wasn't going to spend hours and hours researching it, and I wasn't going to make it my hard and fast worldview. So, she knew that I'd had these beliefs in the past, or I don't know if you'd call them beliefs, but that I had engaged in discussion about these things, and I had even with her. But this QAnon was just way too much bullshit, and it wasn't going to work for me. And my belief is that, going back to the ties with Pizzagate, it's pretty clearly just propaganda. This was during the presidential election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump when this really emerged. And, it was utterly clear to me that this was propaganda.
So, Kurt and his girlfriend came to a point in their relationship where they had an understanding. She had these beliefs, and he didn't share them. He believed they could move past their differences and have a healthy relationship despite the fact that they each saw the world so differently. And for a time, It worked. And then one day, it just didn't.
At this time, her free time was limited. She was going through a divorce. She was working very hard to support her kids, and she didn't have a whole lot of free time. And there wasn't a lot of time that she could spend alone with me. I was in a band at the time, basically a rock band, and we used to rehearse on Saturday nights. Well, Saturday just happened to be one of those nights that she was free and could spend the time with me. And she wanted me to quit the band so that I could spend more time with her.
Kurt considered her request, but ultimately said no.
The band was very important to me because it was a big part of my artistic expression. And, in addition to playing music, we also had theatrics and psychedelic projections and shadow dancers and things like that. So it was a very artful presentation, very visual. And I'm a visual artist. And, it was kind of important to me. And that's about as far as the conversation went. She said, hey, it would be nice if we could hang out on Saturday nights, but, you're in this band. What about quitting the band? And, what I just said is essentially what I told her is, it's important to me to kind of maintain this area of artistic expression in my life. And she accepted it pretty quickly because, she loves art too and music and all that stuff.
But a few days later, it would suddenly seem like maybe she didn't accept it at all.
There was one morning when we were sleeping in and drinking coffee, and she stepped out to have a smoke. And she came back inside looking very flustered and disturbed. So what's going on? She said, I just had a vision. I said, really? She goes, I need to process this vision for a little while. So can I have some privacy? I said, sure, I'll be in the next room. So I don't know, 10, 15 minutes later, she came out and she was a little bit more together. And I said, tell me about your vision. And she said, your bandmates are into the occult.
The first thing that crossed my mind when Kurt said this in our interview was that she was manipulating the situation to get Kurt to stop playing with his bandmates. She had asked him to give up his Saturday night practices, and he had given her a firm no. And so she was going to get what she wanted another way. I couldn't help but see it like this, and it may have even been the truth, but what unfolded next just made that attempted manipulation seem like nothing at all. First, of course, Kurt shot down her accusations that his bandmates were into the occult.
I said, no, they're not. We were not even remotely edgy or satanic or anything along those lines. And I had known my bandmates for decades. And I said, they're not. She said, well, my vision said otherwise. And I said, I'm pretty sure I'm close to these people and I would know if they were Satan worshipers. And they're not Satan worshipers or anything like that. And then she got this look on her face that if I could erase from my memory, I would, but I can't. And it was the look of someone who had just figured it all out. She stood up and started backing away from me with this look on her face.
That's when Kurt's girlfriend pulled out her phone and called someone to come pick her up.
She left the house, and it was just a really bizarre experience.
Later, she would call Kurt.
She told me on the phone what she had figured out. She said that she figured out that my bandmates and I were all Satanists and that we get together every weekend to perform rituals. And that was kind of the best case scenario. And then she sort of moved on to express her belief that in addition to that I was some kind of demon and that I was possessing her and manipulating her and haunting her house and possessing her kids all at the same time. And that was pretty much the beginning of the very worst week of my entire life.
What she does next is nothing short of gutting. It was challenging to hear it, and I'm not going to lie, I was upset, and it will upset you. I wish you could see the video of our interview so you could see just how gentle and unassuming Kurt comes off as. It is because of what happens next that Kurt has chosen not to share the video and why he's using an assumed name. I don't blame him, and when you hear this, you won't either.
The rest of this week pretty much played out via text. And, she was proud of herself for having figured it all out and proud of herself for no longer being a victim to it. And she was going to blow the lid off. She was going to have me and my friends run out of town. She was going to expose it all. She made threats. This plan that she came up with was that she, through her various connections, she was going to have me and my friends arrested. That she would somehow arrange for us to be framed for a crime, and that we would be sent to prison where her friends would also commit crimes and be sent to the same jail, at which time we would be raped and killed. That was the plan that she came up with. That's what she said that she was going to do to me and do to my friends, whose only crime was maybe being out of tune from time to time.
As if that wasn't enough, she didn't stop there.
Another thing that happened is that during our relationship, in the most recent months in our relationship, I had this weird feeling. And it was just this nagging suspicion that she was cheating. And I wrote it off. I mean, I thought of it in terms of, it's just a silly, unfounded fear, and I should just let it go. And I had shared it with her. I don't know how it came up, but at some point I communicated to her that I had this strange, persistent fear. And it wasn't confronting her or anything like that. I wasn't accusing, but I just informed her somehow, maybe in response to a question that she asked, that I had this weird pit of the stomach kind of fear about her cheating. And she said, I think in response to that, she said, but why would I cheat on you? You're the love of my life. We are soulmates. She used this term twin flames, which fit into her New Age beliefs. She said that we were twin flames. She said, why would I ever cheat on someone like that? And I said, it's nothing. So during this week, when all this nastiness came out and she completely turned on me, one of the things that she told me is that my fears were true and that she had been cheating on me. And she brought it up in such a way so as to make it as hurtful as possible. Because during this time, all she wanted to do was destroy me. All she wanted to do was take down this demon and this and this Satan worshiper. And it became her mission to inflict as much pain on me as she possibly could. This literally happened overnight. The day before she had had this vision about my bandmates, we had had a great day together. We took in some natural beauty, and it was just it was a great day. And then the next morning was about as opposite as you could get. So she basically drove it like a knife into my heart. Yes, I have been cheating on you with lots of guys, and I'm glad I did.
Her threats and harassment weren't limited to Kurt either.
There were threats against me. There were threats against my friends who I played in a band with. And she even made threats against a couple of relatives of mine that she had met when they visited because they were teachers. And she came to the conclusion that if they were relatives of mine and teachers, that they must be indoctrinating the youth, and they were groomers. It was before that term really caught on, but she was describing that any relative of mine who was a teacher had to be corrupting kids, if not abusing kids, and that she was going to kill them too.
Kurt was understandably completely lost.
I didn't really know what to do. I kind of informed a couple of close friends as to what was going on. One thing that I did do is I printed out all of her texts from this week. And I had a lot of people telling me to go to the cops. And I was entertaining the idea because this was pretty serious. I mean, these were some very serious threats against my freedom, my safety, my life, and also those of people that I cared very much about. And I was very close to going to the cops. And I was even at the point where I was like, man, if she sends one more threatening text, that's it. I'm going to the cops. But the biggest thing preventing me from going to the cops was thinking about her kids, because they were at very young and impressionable ages. And they had just gone through the most traumatic experience of their lives, which is their parents splitting up. And there was more emotional trauma in that particular divorce than there is in most. And it was very hard for her kids. And, the dust had kind of settled on that situation, and her kids were healing and being resilient, and they were coming out of it. But unless it was absolutely necessary in my mind, I couldn't take actions that would result possibly in her having her kids taken away from her. Because, like I said before, I considered her, despite her beliefs, I considered her to be a good mother. And I knew that her kids needed as much stability and safety and love in their lives as they could possibly get. And I was concerned for my safety, but I was also very concerned about her kids' mental health. I did tell a few friends where they could find that file if anything happened to me.
As Kurt told my husband and I this story on a video call, the two of us just sat there, mouths agape in complete disbelief. The way Kurt described their friendship and love for each other reminded me of my husband and I. I couldn't help but try to put myself in Kurt's shoes. What would it be like to have your best friend in the whole world, who had always supported you and been there when you needed them? What would it feel like if they suddenly snapped and threatened to kill you and your friends and your family? It's not something I'm capable of imagining, but I know it would sting like few other things could. My heart broke for Kurt, and it breaks for every single one of you out there who's struggling with a QAnon significant other. That's a hell of a thing to endure, and Kurt managed to do it with grace. After a week of her threats and anger, things subsided enough that Kurt actually felt comfortable meeting her face to face to sort things out.
I looked at her, said, I am not a Satanist. I don't know any Satanists or pedophiles. I'm not a pedophile. I'm not a Satanist. My band has nothing to do with any of that. No one that I know is into any of that. And I think it resonated with her, and she basically withdrew it all. You know, she still maintained that she had psychic abilities, but that what she had experienced was something of a distortion. Like her position became, I'm still psychic, but that particular vision, I think she called it, it came in backwards or upside down or something like that, or it got distorted. And she used the word delusion. She called it a delusion. I was very relieved that this was no longer her immediate belief. And she wanted to get back together. And I said, no way. I told her that I would be her friend and that I would support her as much as I could. And I even, you know, I still, after all that, I still wanted to be of assistance to her and to help her. I made it absolutely clear that our romantic relationship was done, but I was still concerned about her, and I was still concerned about our kids.
I'm just going to take this opportunity here to explain that a Satanist is not a Satan worshiper, because I know better, and I'd regret not clarifying this common misconception. Satanists do not worship Satan. In fact, they don't believe in him at all, nor any gods for that matter. On the Church of Satan website, it states that man invented all gods. And the Satanic Temple is another Satanist organization that states they do not believe in a literal Satan. Satanists are, believe it or not, atheists for the most part. The two main Satanist organizations exist for very different reasons than worship. For example, the Satanic Temple is an organization that uses the image of Satan as a way to stand up for religious freedom. In the United States Constitution, the First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble, and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Which means that the government is not to identify with one particular religion or favor a single religion over all of the others. So when the 10 Commandments go up in a courthouse, or the children in a public school are asked to pray before they start the day, they are violating the Constitution. This amendment clearly states that the government cannot restrict someone's ability to practice their religion, but it also says that in publicly funded settings, one religion cannot be favored over the rest. Often this amendment is challenged by the actions of the government at the federal level, all the way down to your local school board, and that is where Satanists come in. They organize to fight this favoritism in order to defend your First Amendment rights. In 2018, for example, the state capitol in Little Rock, Arkansas, installed a monument to the 10 Commandments. To challenge this clear favoritism for Christianity, the Satanic Temple had a statue of Baphomet installed in the same location. In other words, they used the symbol of Satan to prove why we should not be installing religious monuments on publicly funded grounds at all. As Christians may be horrified at the sight of a satanic monument at the state capitol, non-Christians may be horrified in the same way at the installment of the Ten Commandments. These satanic organizations don't exist to do evil and perform sacrificial rituals. They exist as advocacy and activist groups that fight for everyone's First Amendment rights. Agree with their tactics or not, they are not Satan worshipers, and they're all pretty normal people just like you and me. There's so much more to know that I can't convey in this quick note on a podcast, so I've left some links for you in the show notes. I am not a Satanist, but I found it pretty interesting to learn what a Satanist truly is. Their core beliefs are very respectable and worth a gander. But Kurt's girlfriend clearly didn't know any of this. When she accused Kurt of being a Satanist, it's pretty obvious she meant that he was a devil worshiper, practicing blood rituals and sacrificing life to the Dark Lord. I asked Kurt where he thought this all came from.
I think that what she had was more the result of her extremely vivid imagination and her emotions and her passions. And I think it also grew out of the fact that she couldn't spend Saturday nights with me because I used to play in a band. And I don't think she liked that. And I think that that contributed to this distortion that happened to her, which she herself called a distortion. And she herself called it delusion.
I also wondered if maybe she felt guilt about cheating on him, if in fact her claim that she had was true. Sometimes people who feel guilty about cheating on their significant other invent some way to make the victim the bad guy. I was amazed when Kurt said he was willing to try to be her friend again, and it's a testament to just how much he truly cared for her to have gone through all of that and then attempt a friendship again.
We were friends for a bit after that. You know, the pandemic was like rocket fuel for QAnon, and I think it was for her. And her mindset seemed to change a lot subsequent to, that initial time. For the most part, everything was civil and peaceful. But then I got an email out of the blue from her where it seemed like she was back to her old ways. And this time, in this more recent email, which there's years have passed since I got that email, but there were threats, but they were of a different nature. Instead of having me framed for a crime and raped and murdered in prison, now her mission seemed to be that she was going to destroy me energetically and spiritually, and that she'd been reading about voodoo and that she was going to bring me down psychically. I'm still here.
That was the final nail in the coffin of their relationship. Kurt put an end to it then and there.
I haven't had any contact with her in quite some time. Unfortunately, I haven't even bumped into her. It's I live in a place where bumping into people is very common. It's a small town. And I feel fortunate in that we haven't had that experience. I haven't turned the corner and in some store and bumped into her, and I'm happy about that, because I would just as soon not.
Kurt told me that he still thinks about her. It's just that now those thoughts are usually triggered by news headlines about QAnon.
When January 6th happened, I was very close to my screen looking for her. It wouldn't have surprised me one bit to see her face in that crowd. She was never a staunch Republican, but she was an energy worker and a light worker and a, new age spiritualist. And that's the path that she took. And I think so many people have gotten into QAnon through that path, whether it's through yoga and Ayurveda, alternative medicine, and that kind of thing. People who already had something of a mistrust of not just government, but the mainstream in general. They slid into this very easily.
This whole ordeal has been excruciatingly painful for Kurt, and he still finds himself in awe of the contradictions, hypocrisy, and the irony in some of the things she said to him.
One of the great ironies, and there's so much irony involved in this overall story, but one of the great ironies is I had never heard the term confirmation bias before QAnon started exploding. And the context in which I first heard it was my QAnon girlfriend accusing me of engaging in confirmation bias because the QAnon worldview challenged my hard-held beliefs. The irony is that these staunch believers in QAnon refuse to listen to any information that could challenge their beliefs. Like the whole thing about the sealed indictments and the fake photo and all of these other bits of disinformation, like the fact that Comet Ping Pong doesn't have a basement, etc. She both introduced me to the term confirmation bias and then very clearly demonstrated it to me.
Kurt has spent so much time thinking about all of this and has reached some conclusions when it comes to the motivations of those who get sucked down the rabbit hole.
I think that it's a very strong pull when there's so much community available to someone who's thinking about getting into this. There's, we all want community. We're community-oriented beings. We want our tribe. And I think that when this new tribe that seems to align with your beliefs emerges and is so present everywhere on the internet, that is a huge temptation. I've thought a lot about what it is that draws people into this. And I think that could be maybe the strongest. If you have somebody who is already mistrusting of the establishment, and now you have the internet, and now you have this online community that is drawing you in and embracing you, it's very hard to resist. I think there's a common misconception that people who get drawn into QAnon are not very smart, but I don't think that's it. I think that lots and lots of very intelligent people get drawn into QAnon because it plays on their fears, and then it offers a community, and it also gives people the opportunity to say either to themselves or to others, hey, I've got the inside information. I've got the real scoop, and it's going to blow your mind. And, it's on the fringes, but it's the real story. And I just happen to be privy to it. So I think it plays on people's fears. It exploits their egos, and it provides this massive overall community, which everyone wants in their lives. I think she really kind of got off on the idea of being that special person who knows the real story beneath the story. I think that emotions have a way of overriding logic very easily, and it happens a lot. And I think that there is a fine line between having a vision and having an emotional hit combined with a vivid imagination. I myself, I've described myself as spiritual, and part of that is, you believe in a higher power, and you believe that you can maybe even communicate with that higher power. And you maybe believe that you can be shown things through this higher power. But in my view, that needs to be kept kind of loose. I would never form a concrete worldview based on my spirituality. My spirituality is different from my political belief system. It's different from my worldly education. It's a part of myself that I love, but I go to a lot of effort to keep it where it belongs, which is in kind of a lofty and nebulous space, if you will. But I think a lot of these spiritualists have pushed it too far. They've adopted a very concrete worldview based on their esoteric beliefs. And that is what is ruining relationships. Because all of a sudden, the worldview becomes more important than other individuals who may be in this person's life. And they choose that worldview over their relationships, no matter what.
Kurt is afraid of what QAnon beliefs may lead to in the future.
Violence. We've seen it already. I won't go into the specifics, but I think that there have been a lot of horrendous crimes committed, and QAnon played a big part. And political violence is growing. I've made it pretty clear publicly where I stand on the subject of QAnon. In terms of, to answer your question, what worries me, I'm worried that I could have a target on my back, because I've been vocal about, my opposition to QAnon and my belief that it's not true. And also the fact that I know a lot about it because of my experiences, and that, I think it's a pretty common belief that amongst that community, that if someone is versed in QAnon lore, but chooses not to believe in it, that person is part of the problem. That person is a CIA shill or part of the deep state at best, or, a demon or at worst.
He sees a massive divide in our culture.
We have this big split. This used to be a discussion that was playing out, that people were engaged in, and it was kind of a debate. It was a big debate, and all the information was there. Now, Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, they said, well, this is dangerous bullshit, and I don't want it on my platform. And they were absolutely within their rights to make that decision. People use the term freedom of speech. And, freedom of speech means that the government cannot come and arrest you or do anything to you based on something that you say. But public forums such as Facebook and Twitter and whatnot, they're privately owned. And if the people who control those decide that in this case, this is dangerous information that can get people hurt and get people killed, and they're welcome to their beliefs, but they're not going to express them on this platform, they made the right decision, in my opinion. And I think maybe it did prevent this from affecting more and more people. I think maybe it slowed the spread of this disinformation, but it created a split where we don't really know, at least not the way we did before, what the other side is thinking and saying and doing.
Kurt has found several methods to help him cope with the loss of his soulmate.
A lot of therapy. What I just described to you was by far the most emotionally traumatic experience of my entire life. And it became the central focus of my therapy and my mental health. And that is the work that I've done. I think, like I was describing, turned what was a gaping open wound into a scar. Not that I can't conjure up painful memories and feelings, but yeah, for the most part, I've had enough time and enough water under the bridge to be pretty okay.
He also listens to a lot of Q-focused podcasts and even tries to find some humor in it all.
I'm a big fan of Jordan Klepper, and I really love what he's been doing along those lines. He's just trying to get people tripped up on their own words, and he's very skilled at it. And I've absorbed all of that he has put out. Ever since this whole thing went down for me, I've been kind of obsessed with the subject. And I've listened to all of your installments, and I've listened to all of the QAnon Anonymous installments, and I've listened to all the conspirituality installments. I mean, I haven't stopped to add up all those hours, but it's a significant chunk of time that I have spent on this subject.
There is no denying that what Kurt experienced was all-out abuse as a result of QAnon beliefs. And he has every single right to be angry. But his advice for those coping with Qs in their lives is anything but that.
I think that we need to avoid coming off as the establishment trying to reel them back. I think that can create a lot of resistance, that if Q people hear that there's discussion about how we should all talk to them, then they're going to think that that's a conspiracy. I think that ultimately we need to employ sensitivity when talking to QAnon people, and we need to be respectful. And that's preposterous, quote unquote, that's preposterous is not an argument. You can't engage with them and then say, that's impossible. That's all the stuff that you believe is just too far-fetched. Well, that's not engaging in the conversation, and that's not allowing them to express themselves. You can't just write off their beliefs as being outlandish. So instead of sharing strategies on how we can deprogram these people, what really needs to happen is compassion. What really needs to happen is just giving them the opportunity to come down kind of on their own, because that's the only way it's going to happen. You're not going to bring down your Q person. But the best thing that you can do for them is to be there for them when they do decide to give that up or let it go. I think that we need to have common ground as much as possible. We'll always have differences in terms of our beliefs, and I think that diversity of thought is a benefit. But Q has created this gigantic schism, and it's torn families apart. And in my case, it tore a very deeply loving relationship apart. I'd like to think that we're in its aftermath, and we need to figure out ways to come back together and to heal these wounds. I feel like what happened to me has changed from an open wound into a scar. And as a scar, I can talk about it, I can show it, I can continue to heal. And I think as a society, we need to heal.
Kurt, Thank you so much for sharing your important story with us. I hope I was able to do it justice and that it has an impact. We wish you the very best moving forward. Patrons will get a bonus clip and ad-free versions of this episode and all future episodes. Sign up starts at just $3 per month, and you can head over there by clicking the Patreon link in the show notes. Next week, we're talking to another Sarah who is just about to begin therapy to cope with her mother's QAnon beliefs. Make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube to be notified when that goes live. Thanks for listening.